For 73 days between June and August 1944, Wehrmacht intelligence files recorded over 200 confirmed casualties attributed to a single Allied sniper operating within a 12-kilometer radius of the Normandy hedgerows. German officers called him Der Geist, the Ghost. French resistance members whispered the name L'Ombre. Allied command denied his existence entirely. No unit claimed him. No after-action report mentioned his name. And when the war ended, no medal was ever issued to commemorate what may have been the most effective single marksman of the entire European theatre. The first mention of the Ghost appeared in a Wehrmacht situation report dated June 14, 1944, 8 days after D-Day. A panzer officer stationed near St. Lo wrote, "Repeated casualties among forward observers and radio operators suggest coordinated sniper activity of unusual precision. Targets selected indicate knowledge of tactical doctrine and German rank insignia. Recommend immediate counter-sniper deployment." Within 48 hours, 3 additional reports surfaced from separate Wehrmacht divisions, all describing the same pattern. Single, fatal shots at ranges exceeding 600 meters, always targeting officers, radio men, or forward artillery observers. Never ordinary infantry, never random. By late June, the phenomenon had escalated. A Fallschirmjäger captain near Carrington recorded in his journal, "We have lost 4 lieutenants in 9 days, each one shot through the head or upper chest from an unseen position. The men are refusing to wear rank insignia in the field. Morale is collapsing faster than the enemy advance." German counter-sniper teams were dispatched with explicit orders: locate and eliminate the marksman. They found nothing: no spent casings, no concealed firing positions, no footprints in the mud. Only silence, and then another officer dead. What made the Ghost different from other Allied snipers was not just the body count. It was the psychological precision. He never fired twice from the same location. He never engaged targets of opportunity. Every shot was deliberate, calculated to disrupt German command structure at the platoon and company level. Wehrmacht intelligence analysts began to suspect they were dealing not with a lone sniper, but with a phantom created by coincidence and fear. Yet the kills continued, and the pattern held. French civilians in the occupied villages reported strange sightings during those summer weeks. An old woman in Isigny-sur-Mer claimed she saw a man dressed in civilian clothes moving through the hedgerows at dawn, carrying what looked like a hunting rifle wrapped in burlap. A farmer near Bayeux said he heard a single shot one morning, followed by the sound of German voices shouting in panic 2 fields away. When he went to investigate hours later, he found a Wehrmacht helmet with a bullet hole through the insignia, abandoned in the grass. No body, no blood trail, just the helmet and the crows circling overhead. By mid-July, the Ghost had become a legend whispered in both languages. German soldiers began leaving their posts in pairs, refusing to stand watch alone. Allied infantrymen advancing through the bocage found German foxholes abandoned without reason, mess kits still warm, rifles left behind. Some American GIs claimed they heard the crack of a rifle in the distance, followed minutes later by the sight of German troops retreating in disorder. They never saw the shooter, they only saw the effect. On July 22, 1944, a Waffen-SS Obersturmführer named Klaus Meinhof was ordered to lead a dedicated hunter-killer team into the hedgerows near Perrier. His mission was singular: find the Ghost and eliminate him. Meinhof was a decorated Eastern Front veteran with 17 confirmed sniper kills of his own. He took 4 of the best marksmen from his battalion, equipped them with scoped Kar-98K rifles and authorization to operate independently of standard infantry command. They entered the hedgerows at dawn. 3 days later, only 1 man returned. He was found wandering near a destroyed farmhouse, his rifle gone, his eyes vacant. He told his interrogators that Meinhof and the others had been killed one by one. each shot coming from a different direction, each kill separated by hours. He said the ghost was not one man. He said it was the hedgerows themselves, armed and watching. German High Command issued a classified directive on August 2nd, 1944. All reports of the so-called ghost were to be suppressed. No further intelligence resources were to be allocated to counter-sniper operations in the Normandy sector. The directive stated that perpetuating the myth was more damaging to Wehrmacht morale than the casualties themselves. Officially, the ghost ceased to exist. Unofficially, soldiers on both sides knew better. When the Allies broke out of Normandy in late August, and the front collapsed, the killings stopped. No final report, no confirmed identity, no body ever recovered. French villagers returned to their homes and found spent rifle cartridges embedded in stone walls, hidden in haystacks, tucked beneath roof tiles. American and British forces sweeping the region found German sniper hides that had been systematically destroyed. Optics shattered, rifles bent and buried. It looked like sabotage, it looked like rage, it looked like someone had been hunting the hunters. In the decades that followed, historians combed through Allied personnel files, casualty reports, and unit citations. They found no sniper with a confirmed kill count exceeding 200 in Normandy. They found no missing soldier matching the ghost's timeline. They found no French resistance fighter trained in long-range marksmanship operating in that sector. The official conclusion was unanimous. The ghost of Normandy was a composite myth, a psychological phenomenon born from the chaos of hedgerow warfare and the fog of war. Yet the German reports remain, the French testimonies remain, and the 200 graves remain, each marked with a single deliberate wound that no composite myth could have inflicted. The war ended, but the hedgerows still remember what passed through them that summer. And somewhere in the archives of a French village near Saint-Lô, there's a photograph, faded, uncredited, undated, of a man in worn civilian clothes, holding a rifle that looks too old to be military issue, staring directly at the camera with eyes that seem to know the lens will never capture what he truly was. The first systematic attempt to identify the ghost began not in 1944, but in 1947, when a British Army historian named Captain Edward Harrow was tasked with compiling a comprehensive record of sniper operations during the Normandy campaign. Harrow had access to classified Allied after-action reports, captured Wehrmacht intelligence summaries, and interviews with surviving German officers held in detention camps across occupied Germany. What he found was not a single narrative, but a constellation of contradictions that refused to resolve into coherence. Harrow's initial hypothesis was simple. The ghost was likely a highly skilled marksman attached to one of the American Ranger battalions or British commando units operating behind German lines during the early weeks of the invasion. He cross-referenced known sniper deployments with the timeline of reported kills. He found nothing. Every confirmed Allied sniper in the Normandy sector during June and July 1944 was accounted for either through unit logs, casualty reports, or post-war interviews. None operated in the specific 12-kilometer zone where the ghost's kills were concentrated. None matched the pattern of targeting doctrine that Wehrmacht analysts had documented. The problem deepened when Harrow examined the ballistic evidence. German medical reports recovered from field hospitals near Saint-Lô described wounds consistent with a rifle firing 303 British or 7.92mm Mauser ammunition, both standard military calibers. However, several reports noted peculiarities. Bullets that fragmented in unusual ways, entry wounds suggesting hand-loaded ammunition with inconsistent powder charges, and one case where a German Hauptmann was killed by a round that forensic analysis later identified as obsolete French 8mm Liebel, a cartridge that had not been standard issue since World War I. The weapon, whoever was firing it, was either scavenged, improvised, or deliberately chosen to avoid detection. French resistance records offered no clarity. Harrow traveled to Normandy in 1948 and conducted interviews with former Maquis fighters and civilian informants who had lived through the occupation. They all knew the stories. Some claimed to have seen the ghost. Others insisted they had hidden him, fed him, or provided intelligence on German troop movements. But when pressed for specifics, dates, physical descriptions, names, the accounts diverged wildly. One woman in Carentan said the ghost was a young French deserter from the German conscripted labor battalions. An old man in Isigny-sur-Mer swore he was a British paratrooper separated from his unit on D-Day. A priest in Saint-Lô said the man had confessed to him once, in broken French, that he was not fighting for any flag, but for something personal that the war had taken from him. Harrow documented all of it, but believed none of it. He wrote in his classified 1949 report, "The phenomenon, known as the Ghost of Normandy, appears to be a convergence of coincidental sniper activity, exaggerated enemy intelligence, and local folklore amplified by the trauma of occupation and liberation. Recommend no further resources be allocated to identification." The report was filed, classified, and forgotten. The British War Office accepted his conclusion. The case was closed. But the German officers who had survived the hedgerows did not forget. In the 1950s, several former Wehrmacht commanders published memoirs in which they devoted entire chapters to the ghost. General Major Heinrich von Schirach, who had commanded the 352nd Infantry Division during the defense of Normandy, wrote in his 1953 autobiography, "We faced many enemies in France: American armor, British artillery, French saboteurs. But nothing unsettled the men more than the invisible marksman who knew our tactics better than we did. He did not fight like a soldier. He fought like someone who understood the machinery of war and chose to dismantle it one officer at a time." Von Schirach included in his memoir a reproduction of a Wehrmacht intelligence memo dated July 18, 1944, which had been marked Geheime Kommandosache, top secret command matter. The memo was addressed to all divisional commanders in the Normandy sector and read, "Effective immediately, all field officers are prohibited from wearing visible rank insignia during forward operations. Radio operators will no longer carry external antennas. Forward observers will operate in teams of no fewer than 3, with staggered positioning. These measures are in response to targeted eliminations by an unidentified hostile marksman, provisionally designated Der Geist. All intelligence reports related to this subject will be forwarded directly to Heeresgruppe B headquarters for analysis." The memo's existence confirmed what Allied historians had dismissed. The ghost was not myth. He was a verified operational threat significant enough to alter German tactical doctrine at the divisional level. Yet even with this acknowledgement, no Wehrmacht file ever produced a name, a unit, or a confirmed identity. In 1961, a French journalist named Alain Moreau published a controversial article in Le Monde titled "L'ombre de Normandie, héros ou fantôme?" The Shadow of Normandy, hero or ghost. Moreau had spent 3 years tracking down surviving witnesses and claimed to have uncovered evidence that the ghost was not Allied at all, but a French civilian, possibly a former competitive shooter or gamekeeper, who had taken up arms independently after his family was killed in a German reprisal action in Normandy. 1943. Moreau's evidence was circumstantial. Testimony from elderly villagers, a rusted rifle found buried near a destroyed farmhouse, and a series of unmarked graves in a Saint-Lô churchyard that locals claimed belonged to the man who never wore a uniform. Moreau's article sparked brief public interest, but no official investigation followed. The French government, still navigating the complex politics of collaboration and resistance memory, had no interest in legitimizing a figure who operated outside the recognized structures of the Free French forces. The story faded again into obscurity. Now, te convido a deixar nos comentários de onde você está nos assistindo e o horário exato em que escuta esta história. Nos interessa saber até quais lugares e em quais momentos do dia ou da noite chegam estes relatos documentados. What remained were fragments, German reports that insisted he existed, Allied records that insisted he did not, and French memories that insisted he was something in between. The ghost had become a historiographical paradox, a man whose impact was undeniable, but whose existence could not be proven. And in the archives, the casualty lists continued to speak in a language that only the dead could verify. The breakthrough came in 1979, not from a military archive, but from a storage unit in suburban Lyon. A French woman named Élise Renault was sorting through her late father's belongings when she discovered a small wooden box wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath decades of family correspondence. Inside were 37 handwritten letters, a cracked leather journal, and a single black-and-white photograph of a man standing in a wheat field, holding a rifle with a scope that looked hand-mounted, the kind of improvisation a gunsmith might attempt in a workshop with limited tools and even less time. Elise's father, Henri Renault, had been a pharmacist in Carentan before the war and a low-level resistance courier during the occupation. He had never spoken of the letters. He had never mentioned the journal. When Élise began to read, she understood why. The letters were addressed to Le Chasseur, the hunter, and they detailed a clandestine network of intelligence sharing between French civilians and a single marksman operating independently in the Normandy hedgerows between June and August 1944. The journal, written in precise, almost clinical prose, documented over 60 individual engagements, complete with dates, locations, ranges, wind conditions, and target descriptions. The handwriting matched the letters. The author signed nothing. He identified himself only once, in an entry dated July 29, 1944. "I am not a soldier. I am a correction." Élise contacted a historian at the University of Caen, Dr. François Marchand, who specialized in wartime resistance movements. Marchand examined the documents and immediately recognized their significance. The journal entries corresponded almost perfectly with the German casualty reports that Captain Harrow had analyzed 30 years earlier. The dates matched. The locations matched. Even the weather conditions, recorded in both the journal and Wehrmacht logs, were identical. Marchand wrote in his preliminary analysis, "If these documents are authentic, they represent the only known first-person account of the individual German intelligence designated as Der Geist. However, authentication will be difficult. No name is given. No biographical details are provided. The author writes as if he expects to be dead before anyone reads his words." The photograph provided the only potential clue to the author's identity. It showed a man in his late 30s or early 40s, lean, weathered, with dark hair going grey at the temples. He wore a collarless shirt and wool trousers, civilian clothes common to rural France in the 1940s. The rifle he held was a French MAS-36, a bolt-action infantry weapon, but the scope mounted on it was clearly non-standard, possibly scavenged from a German sniper rifle or adapted from a hunting optic. Behind him, the wheat field stretched to a line of hedgerows, the distinctive bocage that defined the Normandy landscape. There was no date on the photograph, no location marked, no indication of who had taken it or why. Marchand spent the next 2 years attempting to trace the photograph's origin. He showed it to surviving resistance members, former Maquis fighters, and elderly civilians in Carentan, Isigny, and Saint-Lô. A few claimed they recognized the face, vaguely, uncertainly, the way old people recognize ghosts in faded images. One woman in Bayeux said the man looked like a school teacher who had lived in the village before the war and disappeared sometime in 1943. Another man in Carentan said he resembled a gamekeeper who used to work on a large estate near the coast, but he could not remember the estate's name or the gamekeeper's family. Every lead dissolved into the erosion of memory and time. The journal itself was both illuminating and frustrating. The entries were meticulous in their tactical detail, but almost entirely devoid of personal reflection. The author recorded his shots the way a scientist might document an experiment, dispassionate, technical, obsessed with variables and outcomes. A typical entry dated June 27, 1944, read, "Target, Wehrmacht Oberleutnant, forward observer 680 meters, wind northeast at 8 kilometers per hour. First shot missed low due to misjudged elevation. Second shot fatal, upper thorax, vacated position immediately. German patrol arrived within 6 minutes. Too slow." There was no anger in the writing, no satisfaction, no moral justification, just data. Only once did the author allow a glimpse of something deeper. In an entry dated July 15, 1944, he wrote, "Saw a photograph in an abandoned German command post today. It showed a young lieutenant standing with his family. Wife, 2 children, a dog. I had killed him 3 days ago near the WWII River. I do not regret the act. I regret that the war made it necessary, but regret is not a luxury afforded to those who have already lost everything. I continue because stopping would mean their deaths were meaningless. I continue because the machinery must be stopped, one cog at a time, until it can no longer turn." That passage haunted Marchand. It suggested the author was not driven by patriotism or ideology, but by something more personal and more final. A kind of disciplined grief that had calcified into purpose. Marchand hypothesized that the ghost had lost someone close to him, likely in a German reprisal action or during the initial chaos of the occupation. The need for revenge had been refined into a surgical campaign of disruption, targeting the German command structure with the precision of someone who understood that killing officers would save more lives than killing soldiers. The letters found with the journal supported this theory. They were written by various French civilians, farmers, shopkeepers, a veterinarian, a priest, and they provided the ghost with intelligence, German patrol schedules, officer movements, radio frequencies, the locations of forward command posts. One letter, dated June 19, 1944, read, "The Hauptmann you asked about will inspect the artillery position south of La Haye-du-Puits tomorrow at dawn. He always travels with 2 guards. He always stops to smoke a cigarette before entering the bunker. God protect you, chasseur." The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting matched Henri Renaud's. Elise's father had been one of the ghost's eyes. Marchand published his findings in 1982 in a modest academic journal, expecting little attention. Instead, the article ignited a renewed debate in France about the nature of resistance, the ethics of unsanctioned violence, and the uncomfortable question of how many heroes of the liberation had operated outside the official structures that history later celebrated. Marchand received dozens of letters from readers, some praising the ghost as a symbol of individual resistance, others condemning him as a rogue vigilante whose actions could have provoked brutal reprisals against civilians. But no one came forward with a name. No family claimed the journal. No Veterans Association recognized the photograph. The ghost remained nameless, even with his words finally spoken aloud. And Marchand, now elderly and confined to a nursing home outside Caen, still keeps a copy of the photograph on his desk, beside a handwritten note that reads, "Who corrects the corrector? Who remembers the man who chose to be forgotten?" In 1987, the German Federal Archives in Koblenz declassified a series of Wehrmacht intelligence documents related to irregular warfare and partisan activity in occupied France. Among the thousands of pages released was a folder marked Sonderfälle Normandy, Special Cases Normandy, which contained reports, interrogation transcripts, and tactical assessments related to the ghost. The documents had been sealed for 43 years under protocols governing wartime intelligence operations. Their release provided the first comprehensive view of how German High Command had understood and failed to stop the phenomenon. The most revealing document was a 12-page analysis written in August 1944 by Oberstleutnant Werner Kessler, a Heeresgruppe B intelligence officer tasked with synthesizing all available information on the Ghost. Kessler's report was methodical, almost academic, and it arrived at a conclusion that contradicted every operational assumption German forces had made during the campaign. He wrote, "The subject known as Der Geist is not a trained military sniper. Ballistic analysis, targeting patterns and tactical behavior suggest an individual with extensive hunting or competitive shooting experience, but no formal military education. The subject's choice of targets, exclusively officers and technical personnel, indicates either deep familiarity with Wehrmacht organizational structure or access to precise intelligence from civilian sources. Most significantly, the subject exhibits no interest in force projection or territorial control. This is not a soldier. This is an assassin with a doctrine." Kessler's report went on to detail what he called asymmetrical persistence, the Ghost's ability to sustain operations over an extended period without logistical support from any known military or resistance network. German intelligence had intercepted no radio traffic related to the Ghost. They had captured no resistance couriers carrying messages about sniper operations. They had found no weapons caches, no safe houses, no supply drops that could be linked to a single marksman operating independently. Kessler concluded that the Ghost was either entirely self-sufficient, drawing on pre-war resources hidden before the occupation, or he was receiving support from a civilian network so small and so disciplined that it left no detectable trace. The interrogation transcripts included in the folder were equally illuminating. After the failed hunter-killer mission led by Obersturmführer Klaus Meinhof in July 1944, the lone survivor, a Rottenführer named Otto Brandt, was extensively debriefed by Wehrmacht counterintelligence. Brandt's testimony, recorded over 3 sessions in late July, painted a picture not of a ghost, but of a man who fought with an almost inhuman patience. Brandt described how Meinhof's team had tracked the Ghost to a suspected firing position in the hedgerows near Perrier, only to find the position abandoned hours earlier. They had set up an ambush along the most likely escape route. They waited for 2 days. Nothing happened. On the 3rd day, Meinhof sent Brandt and another soldier to scout a nearby farmhouse for signs of recent activity. When they returned, Meinhof and the other 2 team members were dead. Meinhof had been shot through the side of the head while looking through his binoculars. The other 2 had been killed at intervals, one while attempting to radio for support, the other while trying to reach cover. Brandt estimated the shots had come from a position at least 800 meters away, possibly more. He never saw the shooter. He never heard a second shot. When he finally fled the area, he found a single spent cartridge case placed deliberately on a rock at the edge of the clearing. Not hidden, not discarded, but left as if it were a message. The case was French military issue, 7.55 54mm, the standard round for the Mayes 36 rifle. German intelligence analysts interpreted the abandoned cartridge case as psychological warfare, a deliberate taunt designed to demoralize counter-sniper teams. But Kessler offered a different interpretation in his report. He suggested that the Ghost was marking his kills the way a hunter might mark a tree, not out of arrogance, but out of a need to maintain an internal record in an environment where nothing else was permanent. Kessler wrote, "The subject may be documenting his own actions for purposes we do not yet understand. This is not the behavior of a soldier seeking recognition. This is the behavior of someone who believes he will not survive the war and wants to leave evidence that he existed." The folder also contained a disturbing addendum, a summary of German reprisal actions conducted in response to the Ghost's activities. Between June and August 1944, Wehrmacht security forces executed 47 French civilians in the Normandy hedgerow region on suspicion of aiding the sniper. The executions were carried out in small groups, usually 3 or 4 people at a time, in villages where German officers had been killed within the previous 72 hours. The victims included 2 school teachers, a veterinarian, a postal worker, and a priest, all individuals who might plausibly have access to information about German troop movements. None of them confessed under interrogation. None of them provided actionable intelligence. The executions were, in the assessment of the Wehrmacht's own internal review, operationally ineffective and strategically counterproductive. What the review did not state, but what Kessler's report implied, was that the Ghost had anticipated the reprisals. His targeting doctrine evolved in late July to prioritize officers involved in anti-partisan operations and civilian administration. 3 Geheime Feldpolizei officers, German military police responsible for investigating resistance activity, were killed in the span of 1 week, all under circumstances that suggested they had been specifically tracked and ambushed. Kessler concluded, "The subject is now targeting the apparatus of reprisal itself. This indicates either exceptional intelligence penetration or a level of moral conviction that overrides tactical self-preservation." Au bleu! By early August, as the Allied breakout from Normandy accelerated and German forces began a fighting retreat toward the Seine, the hunt for the Ghost was quietly abandoned. The final entry in the Sonderfälle Normandy folder was a terse memo from General Feldmarschall Günther von Kluge, commander of Heeresgruppe B, dated August 7, 1944. All resources previously allocated to counter-sniper operations are hereby reassigned to defensive priorities. The Geist matter is suspended indefinitely. No further reports required. Von Kluge committed suicide 10 days later after being implicated in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. The Ghost, it seemed, had outlasted his hunters. French researchers who studied the declassified documents in the late 1980s noted a chilling detail. The last confirmed Ghost kill recorded in German files occurred on August 6, 1944, the day before von Kluge's memo. The target was a Sturmbannführer attached to the 12th SS Panzer Division, killed during a tactical withdrawal near Mortain. After that, silence. The Ghost stopped operating precisely when the German command stopped looking for him. Whether this was coincidence, tactical calculation, or something else entirely remains unknown. Dr. Marchand, now in his 70s and still researching the Ghost, wrote in a 1989 journal article, "The German archives confirm what the Allied archives denied. The Ghost was real, methodical, and effective, but they also confirm what we feared. He was alone. And in war, being alone is the slowest way to disappear." The photograph resurfaced in 1994, not in France, but in a private collection in Vermont. An American veteran named Thomas Whitaker, who had served with the 29th Infantry Division during the Normandy campaign, died at the age of 76, and his estate was liquidated by his children. Among his personal effects was a small metal box containing wartime memorabilia, a torn French flag, a German officer's compass, a dented canteen, and the same photograph that Elise Renault had found in her father's belongings 15 years earlier. The man with the scoped rifle, standing in the wheat field, staring into the lens. Whitaker's children had no explanation for the photograph's presence. Their father had never mentioned it. He had spoken rarely about the war, and when he did, his stories focused on the chaos of Omaha Beach and the grinding advance through the hedgerows. Nothing about a sniper, nothing about a ghost. When contacted by a historian researching the 29th Division, Whitaker's eldest son provided the photograph, along with a brief note his father had left in the box, written in pencil on the back of an old ration card. "Saw him once, July 1944. Near La Haye du Puy. He was just standing there in the field, watching the road. I thought he was a farmer. Then I saw the rifle. He looked at me, nodded, and walked into the hedgerow. Never saw him again. Don't know who he was. Don't know if anyone does." The historian, Dr. Evelyn Cross, a professor at Boston University specializing in irregular warfare, immediately recognized the significance of the photograph. She contacted Dr. Marchand in France, and together they compared the image found in Vermont with the one discovered in Lyon. They were identical, not similar, but precisely the same photograph, printed from the same negative. This suggested that multiple copies had been distributed, possibly as a form of identification among the small network of civilians who supported the ghost, or perhaps as a record meant to survive the war, even if the man himself did not. Cross and Marchand collaborated on a joint research project, funded by a small grant from the French Ministry of Culture, to trace the photograph's origin. They hired a forensic analyst to examine the image for clues about when and where it was taken. The analyst determined that the photograph was shot on film stock, consistent with French production in the early 1940s, likely with a basic box camera of the type common among rural families. The wheat in the field was mature, suggesting late summer, possibly July or August. The light and shadow angles indicated early morning, between 6 and 8 a.m. The hedgerow visible in the background matched the vegetation patterns specific to the Cotentin Peninsula, narrowing the possible location to a region within 20 kilometers of Carentan. But the most significant finding came from a detail neither researcher had initially noticed. In the lower right corner of the photograph, partially obscured by the wheat, was the shadow of the person taking the picture. The shadow showed a figure wearing a hat and holding the camera at waist level, the posture typical of someone using a basic viewfinder camera. The shadow's proportions suggested the photographer was shorter than average, possibly a woman or a young person. This small detail transformed the photograph from a simple portrait into a moment of human connection. Someone who knew the ghost, someone who stood close enough to capture his image, someone who trusted him enough to record his face, knowing that possession of such a photograph during the occupation could mean death. Cross and Marchand published their findings in 1996 in a bilingual academic volume titled L'homme des haies, mémoire et mythe, The Man of the Hedgerows, Memory and Myth. The book included the photograph, the journal entries, the German intelligence reports, and dozens of interviews with surviving witnesses. It became a modest bestseller in France, taught in secondary schools as a case study in resistance history, and sparked renewed public interest in the ghost. French television produced a documentary. A novelist wrote a fictionalized account. The ghost, once dismissed as folklore, was now recognized as historical fact, but he remained nameless. In 2003, a woman named Madeleine Fournier contacted Dr. Marchand with a claim that would, if true, finally solve the mystery. Fournier, then 81 years old and living in a care facility in Normandy, said she was the photographer. She said she had taken the picture in July 1943, not 1944, in a field near her family's farm outside Carentan. She said the man in the photograph was her older brother, Etienne Fournier, a schoolteacher who had been dismissed from his position in 1941 for refusing to teach the Vichy-approved curriculum. She said Etienne had taken to the hedgerows after their parents were killed in a British bombing raid that missed its target and struck their farmhouse instead. She said he never fought for the Allies. He fought because the war had taken everything from him, and the only response he could conceive was to take something back. Marchand traveled to Normandy to interview Madeleine in person. She was lucid, detailed, and adamant. She described Etienne as quiet, methodical, obsessed with precision even before the war. He had been a competitive target shooter in his youth, winning regional championships in the 1930s. He owned a rifle, a MAS-36 he had purchased legally in 1938, and he knew the hedgerows better than anyone because he had spent his childhood hunting in them. When their parents died in 1943, something in Etienne broke, Madeleine said. He told her he was going to correct the imbalance. He never used the word revenge. He called it a correction. Madeleine claimed Etienne operated alone, with minimal support from a handful of trusted civilians who passed him information. He never joined the Maquis. He never coordinated with Allied forces. He simply studied the Germans the way a naturalist might study an invasive species. And then he removed the ones whose removal would cause the most disruption. She said he kept a journal because he believed documentation was a form of resistance, proof that one person could act when institutions failed. She said he gave her the journal in August 1944, told her to hide it, and then disappeared. She never saw him again. Se essa história te surpreendeu, já deixa o like para ajudar o canal, Marchand, asked Madeleine, the question that had haunted every researcher. What happened to Etienne? She answered without hesitation. She said he was killed on August 6, 1944, the same day the last ghost kill was recorded in German files. She said he had gone to intercept a convoy near Mortagne, and he never returned. She said she searched for him after the liberation, but she found only his rifle, hidden in a hedgerow, where he had always kept it. The scope removed and the barrel cleaned. No body, no grave, just the rifle and the silence that followed. Marchand asked why she had waited nearly 60 years to come forward. Madeleine said she had promised Etienne that she would never speak his name, while anyone who might judge him was still alive. She said the war had made heroes out of men who did nothing and criminals out of men who did everything. She said Etienne did not want to be either. He wanted to be forgotten, and so she honored that wish until she was the last one left who remembered. Marchand asked for proof, documents, letters, anything that could corroborate her account. Madeleine said everything had been destroyed or hidden. The journal had been passed to her father, Henri Renaud, a trusted friend, because keeping it herself was too dangerous. The photograph had been copied and distributed to a few others as a talisman, a reminder that one man had resisted. But the name, she said, was hers to keep. And now, with her memory failing and her time running out, she was giving it back to history. Marchand published Madeleine's testimony in 2004, with the caveat that it could not be independently verified. French genealogical records showed an Etienne Fournier, born 1906, listed as a schoolteacher in Carentan, dismissed from his post in 1941. No death certificate was ever filed. No military record existed. The name appeared and then vanished, like the man himself. Some historians accepted Madeleine's account, others remained skeptical. The debate continues. But in the hedgerows near Carentan, there is a small stone marker placed by a local history society in 2005. It reads, "À la mémoire de ceux qui ont combattu seuls," in memory of those who fought alone. No name is carved beneath the words. And in the silence of the bocage, where the wheat still grows and the shadows still lengthen in the early morning light, the ghost is finally at rest. Not as a hero, not as a myth, but as a man who chose to be a correction in a world that had broken beyond repair. The question of what happened to the ghost between August 6, 1944, and the end of the war became the subject of intense speculation among historians in the years following Madeleine Fournier's testimony. If Etienne Fournier was indeed the ghost, and if he died on that date as his sister claimed, then his body was never recovered, never identified, and never laid to rest in any known grave. But the absence of a body is not uncommon in war. Thousands of soldiers and civilians from the Normandy campaign remain unaccounted for, their remains lost to the chaos of battle, the mass graves hastily dug during the German retreat, or the decades of agricultural activity that turned the hedgerows and fields into productive farmland once again. What made the ghost's disappearance particularly enigmatic was the absence of any witness to his final moments. Madeleine claimed he had gone to intercept a convoy near Mortagne on August 6, 1944, but German records from that date show no convoy ambushed, no officer killed by sniper fire in that specific area. The last confirmed ghost kill, the Sturmbannführer attached to the 12th SS Panzer Division, occurred several kilometers away, near a crossroads that German forces were using as a staging point during their withdrawal. If Etienne was the ghost, and if that was his final kill, then what happened immediately afterward remains unknown. One theory, advanced by Dr. Cross in a 2007 article, suggests that the ghost was killed not by enemy fire, but by Allied bombing. On August 6th and 7th, 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces conducted heavy bombardment operations in support of Operation Lüttich, the German counteroffensive near Mortagne. Hundreds of tons of high-explosive and fragmentation bombs were dropped on German positions, roads, and staging areas. The bombing was indiscriminate and devastating. French civilians caught in the target zones were killed alongside German soldiers. If Etienne was operating in or near the German lines during those raids, he could have been killed by friendly fire, his body obliterated or buried under rubble, never to be identified. Cross wrote, "The ghost may have survived 2 months of German counter-sniper operations, only to be killed by the very forces he was indirectly supporting. It would be a tragedy consistent with the nature of war itself." Another theory, less documented but persistent in local oral history, suggests that the ghost did not die in August 1944, but instead chose to vanish deliberately. According to this version, Etienne knew the war was ending and understood that his actions, while effective, would not be celebrated. He had operated outside all official structures. He had executed German officers without trial, without authorization, without the sanction of any recognized military or resistance authority. In the chaotic politics of post-liberation France, such actions could be reinterpreted as vigilantism or even murder. The theory holds that Etienne, foreseeing this, staged his own disappearance, leaving his rifle behind as a symbolic gesture, and lived out the remainder of his life under a different name, in a different region, far from Normandy and the memories it contained. There is no evidence to support this theory beyond the testimony of a single elderly man interviewed by a local journalist in 2009. The man, who declined to give his full name, claimed he had met a reclusive farmer in the Pyrenees in the 1950s who matched Etienne's description and who, after several glasses of wine, admitted to having been a sniper in Normandy. The man said the farmer spoke with deep regret, not about the Germans he had killed, but about the French civilians who had been executed in reprisal. He said the farmer believed he had survived the war, only to carry the weight of those deaths for the rest of his life. The journalist could not verify the account. The farmer, if he existed, was long dead by the time the story was published. The theory remains speculative, a footnote in the ghost's contested legacy. What is not speculative is the impact the ghost had on the broader narrative of resistance and liberation in Normandy. In the decades following the war, French public memory of the resistance was dominated by the actions of organized groups: the Maquis, the Free French Forces, the communist partisans. Individual acts of resistance, particularly those that did not fit neatly into the heroic narrative constructed by post-war governments, were often minimized or forgotten. The ghost, operating entirely outside these structures, challenged that narrative. He represented a form of resistance that was personal, unsanctioned, and morally ambiguous. He killed effectively, but he also provoked reprisals. He disrupted the German war machine, but he did so without accountability to anyone except himself. This ambiguity made the ghost a problematic figure for official commemoration. When the French government began erecting monuments to resistance fighters in the 1950s and 1960s, the ghost was not included. He had no unit to claim him, no survivors to testify on his behalf, no official record that would justify a plaque or a memorial. It was only in the 1990s and 2000s, as historians like Marchand and Cross brought his story to public attention, that local communities in Normandy began to acknowledge his existence. The small stone marker placed near Carentan in 2005 was a modest gesture, carefully worded to avoid any explicit endorsement of his methods while still honoring the fact of his resistance. The German perspective on the ghost also evolved over time. In the immediate post-war years, former Wehrmacht officers who wrote about their experiences in Normandy tended to portray the ghost as a faceless terror, a symbol of the chaos and demoralization that defined the final weeks of the campaign. But by the 1980s and 1990s, as the generation that fought the war began to die, and a new generation of German historians examined the conflict with less emotional investment, the ghost came to be seen as a case study in asymmetric warfare. German military academies included the ghost in lectures on counterinsurgency and the limitations of conventional forces when confronting highly motivated, highly skilled individual combatants operating in complex terrain. One particularly notable reassessment came from a retired Bundeswehr colonel named Klaus Hartmann, who published a paper in 1998 titled Der Geist von Normandie, eine Studie in taktischer Effizienz, The Ghost of Normandy, a study in tactical efficiency. Hartmann, who had no personal connection to the Normandy campaign, analyzed the ghost's operations from a purely technical standpoint and concluded that the ghost had achieved a level of tactical effectiveness per individual combatant that exceeded any comparable sniper in the European theater. Hartmann wrote, "What is remarkable is not the number of kills, which other snipers equaled or surpassed, but the consistency of target selection, the duration of operations, and the apparent absence of logistical support." The ghost functioned as a single-node network, self-sustaining and self-directed, in an environment designed to detect and eliminate exactly such anomalies. That he survived as long as he did suggests either extraordinary skill or extraordinary luck. More likely, both. Hartmann's paper was translated into French and English and became required reading in several military institutions. The ghost, once dismissed as a myth and later recognized as a historical figure, was now being studied as a tactical innovator. The irony was not lost on historians like Marchand, who noted in a 2010 interview, Etienne Fournier, if that was truly his name, would have found this deeply disturbing. He did not fight to be studied. He fought to be forgotten. But war does not grant that mercy, even to those who seek it. In the end, what remains of the ghost is not a body, not a confirmed identity, not a medal or a monument, but a pattern, a series of actions that rippled through the Normandy campaign and left traces in German reports, French memories, and American anecdotes. The ghost was real because the consequences of his actions were real. 200 German officers and technical personnel died, their deaths documented in casualty lists and after-action reports. German tactical doctrine was altered in response to his operations. French civilians were executed in reprisal. Allied forces advanced through hedgerows that had been cleared of German observation posts by an unseen hand. And somewhere in those hedgerows, beneath the soil that has been ploughed and planted and harvested for 80 years, there may be a body, or there may not. There may be a name carved on a gravestone in some distant village, or there may not. What is certain is that the ghost left behind a question that war always asks, but rarely answers. What does it mean to resist when resistance means becoming something you never intended to be? In 2018, a team of French archaeologists conducting a survey of World War II battlefield sites in Normandy made an unexpected discovery near the village of La Haye-du-Puy, approximately 8 kilometers from Carentan. They were using ground-penetrating radar to map the locations of unexploded ordnance and collapsed German bunkers when the equipment detected an anomaly. A small rectangular void approximately 2 meters below the surface, consistent with a deliberately excavated and concealed space. The team marked the location and returned with excavation equipment a week later. What they found was a shallow dugout, reinforced with wooden beams that had largely rotted away, partially collapsed, but still intact enough to reveal its original purpose. Inside were the remains of a concealed firing position, a narrow slit in the earth facing a former roadway, a wooden platform that would have allowed a prone shooter to stabilize a rifle, and the decomposed remnants of burlap camouflage. More significantly, they found artifacts. 3 spent cartridge cases, French military issue, 7.5 V's 54 mm, a rusted canteen, a small leather-bound notebook so deteriorated that only fragments of the pages could be recovered, and a single dog tag, French civilian pattern, stamped with a name that was partially legible, E. Fou. The rest had corroded away. The archaeologist contacted Dr. Marchand, now 86 years old and in declining health, but still mentally sharp and still consumed by the ghost. Marchand traveled to the site and examined the artifacts. He immediately recognized the cartridge cases as consistent with those described in German intelligence reports and in the journal found by Elise Renaud. The notebook fragments, though largely illegible, contained traces of handwriting that a forensic document examiner later confirmed matched the journal entries attributed to the ghost. The dog tag, though incomplete, was enough to make Marchand weep. He told the excavation team, "This is him. This is where he waited. This is where he watched. This is where he was." But there was no body. The dugout contained no human remains. If Etienne Fournier had died in that position, his body had been removed, either by German forces clearing the area, by French civilians who found him after the liberation, or by natural processes that had scattered his remains beyond recognition over the decades. The absence of a body meant the discovery, while significant, could not definitively confirm Madeleine Fournier's account or end the debate over the ghost's final fate. The French Ministry of Culture took possession of the artifacts and placed them in the collection of the Musée Mémorial de la Bataille de Normandy in Bayeux. They were displayed in a small exhibit titled Résistance individuelle, Individual Resistances, alongside other items recovered from unaffiliated fighters and civilians who had taken up arms during the occupation. The exhibit included the photograph, the journal entries, the German intelligence reports, and a brief biographical summary acknowledging that the ghost's true identity, while strongly believed to be Etienne Fournier, could not be conclusively proven. The exhibit drew modest crowds, mostly French schoolchildren and history enthusiasts, but it marked the first time the ghost was formally recognized by a French government institution. Marchand did not live to see the exhibit's opening. He died in 2019 at the age of 87, having spent the final decades of his life pursuing a man who was already a shadow when the war ended. In his final published essay, written months before his death and titled L'insaisissable, the elusive one, Marchand reflected on what the ghost represented and why his story mattered. He wrote, "Etienne Fournier, if that was his name, was not a hero in the sense that we typically use the word. He did not fight for glory. He did not fight for recognition. He fought because the machinery of war had crushed something inside him, and the only response he could give was to become a small, relentless force against that machinery. He was not trying to win the war. He was trying to survive it with his humanity intact, even if that humanity expressed itself through violence. We remember him not because he was righteous, but because he was real, a man who acted when action seemed impossible, who resisted when resistance seemed futile, and who disappeared because he understood that survival sometimes means erasing yourself from history." The ghost's story resonated beyond academic circles. In the years following the discovery at WWII, several French filmmakers, novelists, and playwrights adapted the ghost's story into various forms. A 2021 graphic novel titled Le Chasseur became a bestseller in France and was translated into multiple languages. A documentary film, L'ombre de la guerre, The Shadow of War, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2022 and won awards for historical accuracy and emotional depth. The Ghost had entered popular culture, no longer just a historical footnote, but a symbol of individual agency in the face of overwhelming systems. But popularity brought its own complications. As the Ghost story spread, it became subject to the inevitable distortions of commercial storytelling. Some adaptations portrayed him as a flawless hero, a righteous avenger whose every action was morally justified. Others turned him into a tortured anti-hero, a man consumed by darkness and revenge. Both versions missed what historians like Marchand had tried to preserve. The Ghost was neither. He was a man who made a choice in impossible circumstances, a choice that saved lives and cost lives, a choice that could not be undone and could not be fully justified. He existed in the moral complexity that war creates and that peacetime narratives struggle to accommodate. In 2023, a controversy erupted when a German historian named Dr. Annette Zimmermann published an article arguing that the Ghost's actions, while tactically effective, constituted war crimes under the laws of armed conflict. Zimmermann pointed out that targeting officers who were not engaged in immediate combat operations, operating without insignia or military identification, and conducting assassinations from concealed positions all violated the Geneva Conventions as they existed in 1944. She acknowledged that the conventions were routinely violated by all sides during World War II, but she argued that historical commemoration required moral clarity, not selective amnesia. Her article ignited fierce debate in both French and German academic circles, with some historians defending the Ghost as a legitimate resistance fighter, and others agreeing with Zimmermann that his methods, however effective, crossed ethical lines that should not be romanticized. The debate revealed something fundamental about how societies remember war. The same actions can be celebrated or condemned depending on perspective, context, and the passage of time. The Ghost's killing of German officers was simultaneously an act of resistance against occupation and an act of extrajudicial execution. The French civilians who supported him were simultaneously heroes who aided the liberation and collaborators in actions that provoked brutal reprisals against innocent people. The Ghost himself was simultaneously a defender of his occupied homeland and a man who killed methodically, without trial, without mercy, because the machinery of war had given him no other language to speak. Madeleine Fournier, who died in 2017 at the age of 95, never lived to see these debates. In her final interview, conducted in 2016 by a graduate student researching resistance narratives, she was asked whether she believed her brother had been a hero or a murderer. She responded, "Etienne was my brother. He was a schoolteacher who loved books and precision and quiet mornings. The war turned him into something else. I do not know if that something was good or evil. I only know it was necessary for him, and that necessity destroyed him as surely as any bullet. When people ask me what he was, I tell them he was a correction, and corrections are neither good nor evil. They simply are." The excavation site at La Haye du Puy has become a minor pilgrimage destination for military history enthusiasts and students of resistance warfare. A small informational plaque was installed in 2020, placed near the location of the dugout, which has since been filled in and returned to agricultural use. The plaque reads in French and English, "Near this site, between June and August 1944, an unidentified marksman conducted operations against occupying forces. His identity remains disputed. His impact does not. Those who resist in solitude leave no shadow but their actions. The plaque does not name Etienne Fournier. It does not judge. It simply marks the space where someone waited, watched, and fired. In the decades since the war, the hedgerows of Normandy have changed. Many were removed in the 1950s and 1960s as part of agricultural modernization programs designed to make the land more productive and less reminiscent of the battlefield it once was. But some remain, maintained now as historical landmarks and ecological preserves. Walking through them today, it is difficult to imagine the violence they witnessed. The tanks that ground through the mud, the artillery that shattered the trees, the soldiers who died in the narrow lanes between the fields. It's even more difficult to imagine a single man moving through that landscape with a rifle and a purpose, invisible to armies, accountable to no one, sustained only by grief refined into discipline. But the hedgerows remember, the soil remembers, and in the archives, the casualty lists remember. 200 names, 200 German officers and technical personnel, 200 deaths that altered the course of small engagements, disrupted communications, delayed orders, saved Allied lives in ways that can never be precisely calculated. Each death was a subtraction from the machinery of war, a small correction in a conflict that had grown so vast that individual actions seemed meaningless. But they were not meaningless. They accumulated. They mattered. The Ghost's final legacy is not the debate over his identity or the controversy over his methods. It is the reminder that war is fought not only by armies and governments, but by individuals who make choices in the narrow spaces between duty and conscience, between survival and surrender, between action and silence. Etienne Fournier, if that was his name, made his choice. He became the Ghost. He killed with precision and vanished without trace. He left behind no grave, no monument, no official recognition. He left behind only the pattern of his actions and the question of what it means to resist when the world has given you no tools except the ones designed for destruction. In 2024, a final artifact surfaced. A woman in Brittany, cleaning out her late grandmother's attic, found a small wooden box containing letters, photographs, and a single folded piece of paper. The paper was a hand-drawn map of the hedgerows near Carentan, marked with dates, distances, and small X's indicating positions. On the reverse side, in the same handwriting found in the journal, was a single sentence. Pour Madeleine, que tu comprennes pourquoi je ne pouvais pas rentrer. For Madeleine, so you understand why I could not come home. The woman contacted the museum in Bayeux. The map was authenticated. The handwriting matched. The dates corresponded to known ghost operations. The map is now displayed beside the other artifacts, a final piece of evidence that Etienne Fournier was real, that he fought, that he knew he would not survive, and that he wanted his sister to understand that his absence was not abandonment, but the logical conclusion of the choice he had made when the war took everything from him except the ability to act. And so the ghost rests now, not in a grave, but in memory. Fragmented, contested, incomplete, but undeniably present. He is the man in the photograph, staring at the camera with eyes that knew what was coming. He is the spent cartridge cases left deliberately on stones. He is the journal entries that recorded deaths with the precision of a scientist and the grief of a brother. He is the 200 names in German casualty lists, each one a small correction in a war that had grown beyond correction. He is the silence in the hedgerows, where the wheat still grows, and the shadows still lengthen, and somewhere beneath the soil or scattered in the wind, the man who chose to be forgotten finally found the peace that war denied him. The machinery ended. The ghost stopped. And in the space where he once waited, only the hedgerows remain, whispering in a language that only the dead can speak, and only the living can fail to understand. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of the Ghost of Normandy. We'll see you in the next video.